So when you're taking those two ideas, and I know that's just part of your, philosophy and your know-how and strategy for go-to-market. If you look at, I know you, just to kind of verify, you don't only work with education companies now, but you have experience with education and other like finance and other types of startups,
That's
correct?
exactly right.
What are the conversations like when you're trying to, let's say, for the sake of our audience here, with an education company, how do you try to evaluate, what the product is, what problem they're solving is, and then basically where to go from there to get it to the most people who need it?
So if there are existing customers, we like to start with them. What made them buy? How interested are they in the product? How passionately do they still feel about using it? And really, again, what prompted them to buy it? What changed for them? Because we want to go back to the day they decided to buy the product or solve the problem that the product serves, so we can replicate that and meet other people like that. If there isn't existing data on that, we'd want to see who is A, who it was designed for, but B, who's best equipped to see the value and deliver the value back. So whatever the customer's priorities are, that's really what we want to speak to. And the way I often describe this is that there's no shortage of accurate ways to describe your company. What we want to do is find what resonates the most. And it's the same thing of you, right? There's no shortage of accurate ways to describe yourself. But whatever you lead with is what the market will think you do. So the category you put yourself in fundamentally caps how people perceive you. And so it's why we would never want to start with an association that doesn't match what we do. We want to put ourselves in a category that we can win and dominate and really serve value, and then position around that. And that's why the positioning is so core to our marketing strategy, and why the target market segmentation comes before that. Because we want to position around the priorities of our target market as they see them. So if our product can be described in 5 ways, we internally like way 2, but the market likes way 4, we need to pick what they care about. Because if it's something that seems like a nice to have, and maybe they can do it, maybe they won't, and eventually we get to the thing they care about, we should have led with it. Because even if you eventually get to the thing they care about, because you didn't lead with it, it still feels secondary and it feels like an alternative or a backup option versus leading with, here is what we do, it solves your exact problem, here's how and why, versus kind of dancing around the way we intended. And it's also why we want to be really careful about existing market associations with certain terms, especially if they're going to be part of the name. And we would never want to say something like, oh, it's like a ride-sharing app, but it's not at all because it does this, this, and this. The second you say something that has an existing connotation, you can't then recreate a category around it. And this is actually a really common mistake that category creators make. They choose the wrong category and then say but, or they choose a word that already has existing association and then try to explain it away. You've added friction, you've lost momentum. We really can't scale a company if it needs an explanation. Exactly the value should be very clear, and we should remember that word of mouth will always be the biggest driver of growth. We can never scale a company just by having the direct touch points ourselves. It won't be as credible, it won't be as effective. And so if something needs explanation, we've already lost. So we need to have very clear, very compelling positioning as the foundation of that strategy to make sure that it's distributed in ways that people care about.
Yeah, so I really like it's kind of elucidating it for me to say you can't choose a term with too much existing connotation or meaning behind it and then try to change it. So this wasn't planned for any listeners, but I'm just playing the role of trying to make sure I understand everything that
Yeah.
that you, Rebecca, saying. So an example of that could be if you said, let's say I had a curriculum product, and I said it's like Common Core but with a lot more creativity. That doesn't work because everyone
Right.
has Common Core in their mind as X,
Exactly.
whatever.
Like you said, it's a literacy product, but it does math, right?
Mhm.
Like, well, how does this work then? Or,
Mhm.
especially if it's a company name, and often how a company has chosen their name tells me a lot about the challenges they may face in their market research. So a company name really should be memorable and short and sticky and adaptable and have positive association to the market, if anything, definitely not negative or confusing. And if people name their company because it was their kid's mascot, or it was their grandma's name, or it's their initials, A, it's probably too long, and B, doesn't really mean anything to the market. And so people who kind of name their company them-centric are probably the kinds of people who won't be listening to market feedback very well, will be designing the product around their personal solution. And I often say that a little bit of exposure is worse than no exposure, because it makes you extrapolate your own experience as the entire market. And in education, this is even riskier, because everyone has an association with education. They have a student, they were a student, their sister's a teacher, right? And so you can very quickly think that you know how parents think because you're a parent. And this is a big risk in education. And companies that have been named because of an amazing experience the founder had typically won't be listening to the market research as much, and will be designing a product too much with the internally driven them sensibility.
Yeah, this is a really important point when you said that, education by default, actually kind of fortunately in our country, for example, everyone has a experience often with, even further the same, similar, well, what they think is this universal public school experience, for example.
Right.
And then, forgetting about that we have 50 states with individual Department of Educations. We have different demographic, socioeconomic education trends that all coalesce to create these specific problems that need to be solved.
Absolutely.
That are not necessarily just based on, either the founder or the founder's children, or even when it's a teacher or administrator with their specific school or students. So yeah, that's a really...
Absolutely. Especially if they have left the field. If they haven't been back in school for a while, oftentimes EdTech founders who aren't personally educators spend a lot more time in schools because they're aware of that weakness. Former educators sometimes feel like they know schools, but if it's been years, it's possible schools don't look anything like the one you were at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.